boat and you can just see it there and go, got it, okay, don't ask the question. Don't annoy the race officer. Generally, if we're hanging around out there and looking like we might not be just there for the sandwiches, then we're probably going to run another one. Why didn't they disqualify the boat that ran into me? Oh boy, I've been asked this a few times too. So, as you may know, sailing is supposed to be a self-policing sport. We're supposed to sort out our own dramas. So basically, if you run into somebody, it's your job to figure out what to do, to take a penalty, if you've really done some damage, to retire, or if you were the boat that got hit, you got to protest. That's the deal. Nobody minds. It's a good idea. We can't, as race officers, put in a protest on your behalf. So we saw so-and-so hit so-and-so else. That's not our job, and we're not supposed to do that stuff. We can be called as a witness. So if we saw the collision, we can be called. If you ask nicely, we'll come along and say what we saw. We basically can't just disqualify somebody either. That's not how this works. We can't just go, no, you stuffed up, see you later. In that case, there's a couple of other cases where we can, we'll get to them. However, if, again, we're human and we make an error and it affects you in some way, your finishing place is worse, and it has to be significantly worse, then you can ask for something called redress. So pretty much what that is you write a form out with the race committee, with the protest committee, and say, hey, the race officer took the mark out before I got there, or something, which meant I couldn't go around it, which meant I couldn't get a finishing place. That is a bit of a problem. If we recognise that we've made an error like that, we will ask for redress on your behalf. We will say, oops, sorry about that, we made an error, and that boat was significantly affected, and then hopefully the protest committee can sort it out and give you some kind of score. But you can absolutely ask for redress if you feel like you've been wronged, but you have to make sure that it's through no fault of your own, which is a bit that falls over quite a lot, and that your position's been made significantly worse. They're the big things. So sometimes people go in there and say, oh, there was a wind shift and you didn't move the mark and I went from 2nd to 4th, so I want redressing. It's not going to fly. You're not going to get it. Probably easy to remember that you can't actually protest the race committee because we're not racing. You can only protest other beings who are doing the racing. But you can ask for redress to get your score approved if you think you've made hard done. Alright, here's a good question. This is question number 11 technically. Why are there so many gosh darn rules? Well, nobody really knows, but here we are. Lost in the midst of time.
That's wrong. Yeah. Last time I looked, it was 171 pages.
Is there? Good grief. Good figure. Alright, well, anyway, I don't know. I've got it's more writing than this. That's right. Well, I don't know, because the last page of this is F63, so it doesn't help. Basically, there's a huge number of rules in here, right? Do you need to know them all? Heck no, of course you don't.
And that was something you just said.
There's probably 2 sections that are of interest if you want to read them. And those are part 1, which is the fundamental rules, and part 2, which is a bit about when boats meet. So that's your port and start, your wind with leverage, and luffing and all the kind of fun stuff like that. If you really want to, there's some really fun stuff you can read in the Australian Sailing Special Regulations, which is generally about safety and other dumb things, but important to know. That's where you get things like Category 6 come from, like what you need to do for, say, Category 6 racing. So there's a new one of them for January 2021 as well, so for those of you who are very bored, you can read those. It's probably easier generally to see rules happening as they happen on the race course, but sometimes you read the rule and you think, I know that rule and that doesn't make sense to me. So sometimes it's just easier to actually see it happen on the course. But we'll do our best and we'll go through a few of them now. Probably an important thing to know, which some people don't know, is when do the rules start to apply? Any thoughts?
Start the
Prep signal.
Prep signal? I got start, prep signal. You're saying 4 minutes, Dave? Yeah, well, that is probably the prep signal. Yeah, absolutely. So it's not at the start, because clearly we don't want people just bashing the bejesus out of each other while we're on the start line. But equally, we want to give you a bit of time to get your act together. So it's not at the warning signal, which is generally at 5 minutes. It's actually at the preparatory signal at 4 minutes. So if you have a collision in that gap between 5 and 4 minutes, that's still potentially a problem, but the rules aren't in effect at that stage. You're in the sort of collision regulations and so on. So don't do it. I think it's a short version.
You can change my.
You can change your answer.
Is it just like a boat plan
race or that has been racing is also constrained by certain rules.
You are potentially subject to the rule after you've finished, but generally it's when you've, between that 4 minutes and when you've completely crossed the finish line and you're out of the way. Yeah, that's pretty much the gist of it. So our starting sequences we've kind of talked about a little bit. There's two main ones that you'll see a lot of the time, which is the 5-minute warning signal, 4-minute preparatory, 1 minute where your preparatory goes down and is in effect, and then go. That's your normal one. You might also see a 3, 2, 1 go, the same kind of variation. Literally the same thing, we just don't waste any time in the middle. It just makes things go a little bit faster. And you would generally use that with dinghy racing when you've got multiple fleets to start off with divisions and you don't want to panic about. Because if you can imagine you run 5-minute sequences and you run 6 of them, it's half an hour, and you're starting the next lot, potentially. You're never going to break. So they're pretty much the main ones that we use a lot of the time. Luffing. Hey, everybody loves a luff, don't they? Basically what that is, if you're not aware, is it's pretty much pushing a boat up into the wind from their leeward side, so from underneath them. And it's totally acceptable on the start line as long as you give them enough room to keep clear. And there's a bit of fun stuff around how much time and how much opportunity is enough. You can always have an idea about that with somebody, but generally we want to give them a little bit of room to keep clear. We don't want to just go get up, smash, because that doesn't win you any friends. But it is a helpful trick if you want to make yourself a bit more room on the start line to move everybody up a bit so that you can sail away and get some speed and off you go. And you'll go along stuff. Barging. Well, this is kind of the opposite. It's a bit of an indelicate term, but I kind of like it. Pretty much means that you're trying to push your way in at the committee boat end of the line where there isn't room, but of course it's a good spot to be because it means you're over the top and taking the wind of the folks below you. If you're sailing against anyone who knows what they're doing, you will not be able to do this because they will sail up and just shut the boat, as we call it. Basically, stop there from being any room there for you to sail through. So it's definitely not for the faint-hearted or possibly if you'd like your boat.
Have you ever been on a starboat when someone's been ran into the starboat?
Absolutely, yeah. It's exciting.
We all have.
You sort of go, you don't really want to watch because you're thinking, oh, this is going to be ugly. And generally I've got too much on at that point to be worrying about them. But sometimes, because I'm talking into a tape recorder, like I'm commentating the race to say if people are over and what's going on. So sometimes you hear on my tape, oh, that's messy, or they're going to be in trouble, or something, because that has happened.
So when you use your boat, you go, oh, crap.
Happily, none of the boats I run racing on are actually mine, so there's that. Generally what we do is we put out that, what people actually call a bargee buoy, so a distance mark that hangs off the back of the committee boat, which means in theory they shouldn't be that close. But it does happen. And dinghy racing, it probably happens more often because they're smaller and more maneuverable and a bit braver / silly. And hopefully you don't do too much damage, but it does happen. There's been boats that have done, managed to crunch alongside quite nicely.
And the condition line, is that you see collision?
I don't know that I've ever been running into the finish, but I'm sure it's happened. Catching the anchor line is something that happens sometimes at the finish. People go, la la la, I finished, hooray, coming along the port usually, and then go clunk and then hit the thing because it's not sunk enough. Yeah, that's kind of fun. Because they've just gone to sleep on it.
The barging doesn't include inserting yourself into the line between two boats.
Sure, it can include that too. I mean, it generally means at the committee boat, yeah, if you shove yourself anywhere where you are not entitled to room, then it can probably count as barging, absolutely. Don't get any ideas, right? It's not encouraged. Funnily enough, it's actually okay to start in the middle of the line. I know this seems like a shocking fact, but it's the same thing. It's the same bit of water, and it's actually more room there probably because people are bunched up at either end most of the time, or at one end or the other. It's harder because you've got to figure out exactly where the line is, and that's not as easy when you're far away from one end or the other. And you get, yes, as David's drawing there with his hand, a nice big line, sag as you call it. So people are a little further back because they're not entirely certain that it's where they're supposed to be. So if anyone knows how to get a transit, or if you can find somebody who knows how to do that, then it's super handy.
I got straight through, across the head, take green market.
Yeah, there you go. Okay. Well, if we have a start line there, you're across it.
Beautiful transit.
Does that mean you're on the other end of the line? Stay still. before about the start preparatory signals. So we've got the three main ones there, our P flag, our U flag and the black flag. One of the race officers around here calls it pub protocols, and P, U and B, which is easy for us to And basically your options here for if you're over, as I mentioned, with the P flag you can just duck back and make sure your boat's entirely on the pre-start side of the line, and then off you go. With the U flag and the black flag, you can't fix it. You are stuffed, unfortunately. So there won't be an X flag flying for your individual recall. We'll just make a note of you in a little black book, and unfortunately that is you done for the day unless we have a U flag and you get the whole thing canned and you can come back to try again. So it's a bit ugly, and most of the time we don't need to use it, which is great, but we do have it as an option.
Can you just elaborate there? Why is there no notification that a boat has transgressed U flag or black flag?
We would generally, you can't, as I say, you can't make it right. So there's not really any reason to tell you. Sometimes people will put it on the radio because then you have the choice to keep sailing the race, if you like, which you're entitled to do, or to hit the bar early. So if you've got a black flag, for instance, and there's no more racing today, you might want to go home, and that's fair enough.